This rustic fantasy must end. Ethan for children with her. The voice, sharp as shattered ice, cut through the fragile peace he'd fought so hard to build. Ethan faced his mother, the formidable Eleanor Ainsworth, his own voice, low, unwavering a wall against her disapproval. This is not a fantasy, Mother. This is my family. And I will not abandon them. Will Ethan finally shield the happiness he's rediscovered, or will the shadows of his past and immense family pressure shatter everything once more? So many secrets, so many difficult choices lie ahead. What path would you choose in his place? Subscribe to follow Ethan's journey and share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear what you think will happen next. The penthouse apartment, a glass-walled kingdom perched atop Chicago's glittering sprawl, felt more like a gilded cage to Ethan Ainsworth. At 45, he had everything a man could ostensibly desire: a business empire that spanned continents, a name that commanded respect in financial circles, and a fortune so vast it had become an abstraction. Yet an unshakable emptiness gnawed at him, a hollow echo in the marble halls of his success. It was a void that no acquisition, no accolade could ever seem to fill. He stood before the panoramic window, a crystal tumbler of untouched amber liquid in his hand, the city lights blurring into a meaningless kaleidoscope below. It wasn't the view he was seeing, but a ghost from a life he'd almost allowed himself to live nearly 2 decades past. A young woman's face, framed by soft, dark hair, her eyes alight with a warmth that had briefly, miraculously thawed the ice around his own carefully guarded heart. Olivia Walker. She had been a temporary maid in his mother's formidable household one summer, a breath of fresh, unpretentious air in an atmosphere typically thick with unspoken rules and dynastic expectations. Olivia, with her quiet dignity, her easy laughter, and a way of seeing past the Ainsworth air to the young man beneath. He in turn had found himself inexplicably drawn to her genuine spirit, a stark contrast to the calculated alliances and superficial connections that usually populated his world. The memory, sharp and painful, surfaced unbidden, a stolen evening far from his mother's disapproving gaze. Laughter under a starlit sky, a connection so potent it had terrified him. And then the morning after. His own voice, laced with the learned arrogance of his station, the chilling echo of his mother Eleanor Ainsworth's subtle but constant warnings about unsuitable attachments. This was a pleasant distraction. Olivia, he'd said the words, feeling like shards of glass even as they left his lips. But let's not mistake it for anything more. He remembered the flicker of pain in her eyes, quickly masked by a composure that shamed him even now, before she'd simply nodded and walked away. A week later, she was gone from the household, vanished without a trace, leaving behind only the lingering scent of lavender and a gaping hole in his carefully constructed world that he'd been trying to fill ever since. His mother Eleanor had expressed a cool satisfaction at Olivia's departure. Some people just don't fit Ethan. She'd remarked, her gaze unwavering. It's for the best. At the time, young and eager to prove himself worthy of the Ainsworth legacy, he had tried to believe her. Now the words felt like a condemnation of his own cowardice. Ethan swirled the drink, the ice clinking like a distant mournful bell. The emptiness wasn't new, but its persistence had become unbearable. He needed something, an answer, a reckoning. He set the glass down with a decisive click. The next morning, David, his long-time head of security, and now a trusted, albeit discreet, fixer, stood in Ethan's minimalist office. David was a man of few words, his expression perpetually unreadable, but his loyalty was absolute. "I have a task for you," David Ethan began, his voice carefully neutral. A personal matter. I need you to find someone. Her name is Olivia Walker. He provided the few details he had, her approximate age, then the time frame she'd worked for his mother. She would be around 42, 43 now. I want a full background check. Find out where she is, what her life is like. David's eyebrow, a master of minute movements, twitched almost imperceptibly. Any particular reason, Mr. Ainsworth, after all this time? Or is this a philanthropic endeavor? There was a dryness to David's tone that few dared to use with Ethan. Ethan allowed a small, weary smile. Let's just say, David, that some investments yield returns far more valuable than monetary ones, and some debts are long overdue. He paused. I sometimes wonder if I were to live a normal life, what that might entail. Perhaps not private jets to procure groceries. David's expression remained stoic, but a glint of something akin to amusement flickered in his eyes. Indeed, sir. I imagine the challenges of navigating a supermarket aisle without an advance team could be formidable. I'll begin the search for Ms. Walker immediately. Weeks turned into a month, then 2. Ethan threw himself into his work, the familiar rhythm of high-stakes deals a welcome distraction. Yet the underlying current of anticipation, of dread and hope, intertwined, never truly subsided. He found himself scrutinizing faces, in crowds, a foolish, irrational habit, half expecting to see Olivia's ghost materialize from the past. Then the call came. Mr. Ainsworth, David's voice, was even as always, but Ethan detected an uncharacteristic note within it. I believe I've located Olivia Walker. Ethan's hand tightened on his phone. Tell me everything. It wasn't easy. She seems to have deliberately kept a low profile. She's living in a small, rather remote village in a rural county. Oakley Creek. Owns a modest cottage, runs a small market stall selling handmade crafts and local produce. By all accounts, she's respected, hardworking, and a single mother. A single mother. The words hung in the air. Ethan felt a strange pang, a complex mix of emotions he couldn't immediately decipher. Children, he asked, his voice hoarse. Yes, sir, David confirmed. That's the more particular part of the discovery. She has 4 daughters, all around 6, possibly 7 years old. They appear to be, identical. Identical. 4. Ethan sank into his leather chair, the city skyline outside his window suddenly tilting. 4, he breathed. Indeed, sir. Hope, Grace, Faith, and Joy Walker. I have a photograph taken discreetly, of course. An email notification pinged on Ethan's computer. With trembling fingers, he clicked it open. The image resolved on his screen. Olivia, a little older, lines of weariness etched around her eyes, but those same eyes still held a resilient warmth. And surrounding her, clinging to her hands, her skirt, were 4 little girls. 4 little girls with wide, curious eyes, and a tumble of dark hair so familiar it stole his breath away. One of them, little Joy perhaps, was laughing, her head thrown back, and in the curve of her cheek, the precise shape of her smile, Ethan saw an undeniable heart-stopping reflection of himself. The air rushed from his lungs. The year's palabras, orstas necesarias, fell away. The carefully constructed walls around his heart didn't just crack, they shattered. He stared at the laughing child, then at the other 3, each a miniature echo, a living testament to a past he had tried to bury. A whirlwind of emotions engulfed him, a tidal wave of guilt so profound it was a physical ache, a disbelieving wonder, and an overwhelming, terrifying surge of connection. This was the void. This was the missing piece. Not 1, but 4. He leaned forward, his gaze fixed on the screen, his voice a mere whisper lost in the sudden, deafening roar of his own pulse. Olivia. And these are hope, grace, faith, joy. Our children. The journey to Oakley Creek was a descent into a world Ethan Ainsworth had only ever viewed from 30,000 feet or through the tinted windows of a limousine. He'd shed his bespoke suits for worn denim and faded shirts, sourced by David from a second-hand store items that felt alien against his skin. The polished cadence of his speech was consciously roughened, his demeanor recalibrated from command to something approximating weary humility. He was now Harry, a man down on his luck, hoping to scrape a meager living from a rickety cart, palavrous, necessarius, filled with an assortment of equally meager goods, cheap trinkets, mended tools, things a genuine peddler might carry. Oakley Creek itself was a cluster of time-worn buildings nestled in a valley that seemed to have been overlooked by the relentless march of the 21st century. The air smelled of damp earthwood smoke and a surprising sweetness he later identified as honeysuckle. His rented room above the quiet general store was Spartan, the plumbing antique and temperamental. His first attempt at lighting the ancient kerosene stove for a cup of instant coffee had resulted in a plume of black smoke and a coughing fit, a far cry from the silent efficiency of his espresso machine back in Chicago. David, who had overseen the initial setup from a discreet distance before vanishing, would have permitted himself a rare, almost invisible smirk. The village market was a small, bustling affair in the central square, and there, under a faded blue awning, was Olivia. She looked tired undeniably, so the years and untold hardships having etched fine lines around her expressive eyes and mouth. But they had not dimmed the spirit he remembered. There was a resilience in her posture as she arranged her handmade soaps and embroidered linens, a gentle patience as she dealt with a querulous customer. And then there were the girls, 4 of them, Hope, Grace, Faith, and Joy. A whirlwind of pigtails, scraped knees, and infectious giggles, they darted around her stall like bright, energetic butterflies, their dark hair so like his own catching the sunlight. Olivia managed them with an almost preternatural calm, a soft word here, a guiding hand there, her love for them, a palpable aura. Ethan, or rather Harry, felt his chest constrict. The sheer overwhelming reality of them of her was a blow more powerful than any boardroom confrontation. He set up his own cart a respectful distance away, fumbling with the display of his mismatched wares, his hands accustomed to the weight of financial reports, and the smooth glide of a Mont Blanc pen, felt clumsy and oversized, handling chipped pottery and tarnished silver plate. His first customer was a stern-faced elderly woman who haggled mercilessly over a bent ladle, eventually departing with it for a price that probably didn't even cover its original second-hand cost. Ethan felt a bizarre sense of accomplishment. Olivia, he noticed, treated him with a polite, professional distance. A nod in the morning, a brief good day if their paths crossed. He was just another struggling vendor, another face in the tapestry of her difficult life. The anonymity was both a relief and a fresh kind of torment. The children, however, were less reserved. It was Joy, the one whose laugh in the photograph had so undone him, who approached first, her tiny hand clutching a dandelion. She stopped a few feet from his cart, her head tilted, studying him with an unnerving intensity. "Hello," she said, her voice surprisingly clear. "Are you new Ethan's throat went dry?" Yes. Yes, I am. Name's Harry. I'm Joy." She thrust the dandelion at him. "This is for you. Mummy says new people need welcoming." He took the flower, its stem surprisingly sturdy, in his large hand. "Well, thank you, Joy. That's very kind." Soon the others followed, a curious, chattering quartet. Grace, a thoughtful expression on her face, pointed to his hands as he tried to polish a dull brass candlestick. "Your hands are very clean, Mr. Harry. And soft. Not like a working man's hands." Ethan nearly dropped the candlestick. "Oh, well, I try to take care of them," he stammered hastily, rubbing them on his jeans. "Good for delicate work, you see." He internally cringed at his own feeble explanation. Faith, bolder than grace, asked, "Do you have any candy? Mr. Harry Mummy only lets us have it on Sundays, and today is only Tuesday." I'm afraid not today. Little one," he said, a pang of guilt striking him. He who could buy 1,000 candy stores had nothing to offer these children. His children. Hope the quietist simply watched him with Olivia's perceptive eyes, making him feel transparent. Later that week, a sudden downpour sent vendors scrambling to cover their goods. Olivia struggled with a heavy tarpaulin, the wind whipping it from her grasp as she tried to protect her more delicate embroidered items. Her stall was larger, more established than his, with more to lose. Without a second thought, Ethan abandoned his own meager, already damp collection of odds and ends, and rushed to her aid. Together they wrestled the canvas into place, his strength honed by years in a private gym surprising both of them. "Oh, thank you," Olivia said, breathless, brushing a stray strand of rain-soaked hair from her forehead. She looked up at him, really looked at him for perhaps the first time. There was gratitude in her eyes, but also a flicker of something else. Surprise, perhaps a faint, puzzled frown, as she registered his unexpected efficacy. I wouldn't have managed that on my own. Most folks just look after themselves when the weather turns. Happy to help a neighbor." Ethan mumbled, suddenly aware of how close they were standing, the scent of rain and lavender, and Olivia herself filling his senses. He saw the exhaustion in the slight droop of her shoulders, but also the unyielding strength in her jaw. Still, she said, a thoughtful note in her voice that was quick thinking and strong work. "You secured those ropes like a sailor." She offered a small, tired smile. "I'm Olivia, by the way. Olivia Walker." "Harry," he replied, his heart thumping. "Just Harry." She nodded. Then her gaze drifted to his nearly abandoned cart, where a few of his trinkets were now sitting in puddles. A look of concern crossed her face. "Oh, your things. I'm sorry helping me has cost you." It's nothing," he said, a wave of shame washing over him at the lie, at the ease with which he dismissed what would be a genuine loss for a man like Harry. "Nothing important." Olivia looked at him again, that puzzled, thoughtful expression returning for a brief moment before she turned to usher her daughters, who had been sheltering under a nearby overhang, more fully under her awning. "Well, thank you again, Harry. It seems Oakley Creek has gained a rather capable and kind new neighbor." Capable. Kind. The words resonated within Ethan, a stark contrast to the man he knew himself to have been all those years ago. And as he returned to his own sodden, insignificant stall, he wondered if this Harry, this fiction he was attempting to weave, was perhaps closer to a man he wished he could have been all along. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with the peril of discovery, but a fragile, unfamiliar seed of purpose had begun to take root in the barren landscape of his soul. The rhythm of Oakley Creek began to seep into Ethan's bones, unsettling, yet strangely comforting. Days at the market stall, as Harry settled into a routine. He learned the names of the regulars, the ebb and flow of village commerce, the art of appearing patiently occupied, even when sales were non-existent. His small, thoughtful acts of kindness, a mended hinge for a neighboring vendor, a shared umbrella during an unexpected shower, slowly chipped away at the initial reserve of the community. Olivia, too, gradually softened. The professional politeness she'd initially shown Harry warmed into a cautious friendliness. She began to share snippets of her day, the small triumphs and larger frustrations of raising 4 energetic daughters on a shoestring budget. He'd listen, truly listen, offering a quiet word of encouragement or a surprisingly insightful observation that sometimes made her pause and look at him with that familiar, faintly puzzled expression. "You seem to understand a lot, Harry," she remarked one afternoon after he'd made a comment about the fluctuating price of wool affecting her yarn supplier. "For a man who sells, well, a bit of everything and nothing." Ethan felt a familiar jolt of panic. Just an old soul, Olivia, he'd managed, offering a self-deprecating smile. Picked up a lot of useless information over the years. Her best friend Chloe, a vivacious woman with a sharp wit who ran the village bakery, was less easily convinced. Chloe often stopped by Olivia's stall, her eyes bright and assessing, frequently lingering on Harry. "So Mr. Mysterious Harry," Chloe said one day, a mischievous glint in her eye as she handed Olivia a warm loaf of bread. "Still haven't told us where you wandered in from, have you? Or what exactly brings a man of your particular talents to mending broken teacups in Oakley Creek?" She gestured towards a delicate porcelain cup he'd painstakingly repaired for another villager. "Just looking for a quiet life, Ma'am," Ethan replied, trying for a tone of simple weariness. "A quiet life, or a quiet place to hide something," Chloe retorted, though her tone was more teasing than accusatory. Olivia shot Chloe a half-hearted glare, but a small smile played on her own lips. The fourfold, as Ethan now privately called them, had adopted Harry with the unreserved affection only children possess. Hope the eldest by a few minutes would often bring him a carefully drawn picture, her brow furrowed in concentration, as she explained its intricate details. Grace, gentle and shy, would sometimes sit near his cart, quietly reading a tattered storybook, occasionally looking up to share a silent smile. Faith, ever bold, would quiz him relentlessly about the big world outside Oakley Creek, her questions surprisingly astute. And Joy, the effervescent youngest, would simply chatter, a constant bubbly stream of observations, questions, and pronouncements that filled Ethan's days with an unexpected light. Mr. Harry Joy announced one morning, her hands on her hips, "Mummy says you're a good man because you fixed Mrs. Gable's wobbly chair. Can you fix my dolly?" Her arm fell off again. He'd spent an hour that afternoon meticulously reattaching the doll's limb, the tiny plastic joint, a far more complex challenge than any corporate merger he'd ever navigated. The look of pure delight on Joy's face when he presented the mended doll was a reward richer than any stock dividend. These moments were a bittersweet cocktail of profound joy and deep corrosive guilt. The connection he felt with these children with Olivia was undeniably real, more authentic than anything he'd known. Yet it was all built on a lie, a carefully constructed artifice that could shatter at any moment. He saw the worn patches on Olivia's shoes, the way she sometimes skipped a meal so her daughters could have a little extra, the constant gnawing anxiety that flickered in her eyes when an unexpected bill arrived. There was a persistent leak in the roof of their small cottage that she mentioned with a sigh, a looming worry with the rainy season approaching. He, Ethan Ainsworth, could fix it all with a single phone call, yet Harry could only offer sympathetic murmurs and a promise to look out for cheap shingles. The impotence was maddening. One afternoon, as the market was winding down, Hope, who had seemed a little listless all day, complained of a sore throat and a headache. Olivia's brow furrowed with immediate concern. She felt Hope's forehead, her expression growing more anxious. "You feel a bit warm, sweetie," Olivia said, her voice gentle but strained. "Let's get you home." By evening, Hope was flushed and feverish. Ethan, from his small room above the general store, could hear the fretful cries, and Olivia's soothing, worried tones drifting through the thin walls. The sound twisted something inside him. The next morning, Olivia's stall was closed. Chloe, her usual cheerfulness subdued, told him hope was worse. The doctor from Denison is only in town, Movilidad, Reducitor on Thursdays, and that's 2 days away, Chloe said, wringing her hands. Olivia's trying everything, but the fever won't break. She's terrified, Harry. We all are. Little ones can go downhill so fast. Ethan felt a cold dread grip him. He remembered the hushed, frantic phone calls of his own childhood, when illness struck the immediate flurry of specialists, the best medical care money could buy. And here, his daughter, his hope, was at the mercy of a village doctor's intermittent schedule. He found himself at Olivia's cottage door, his knuckles raised to knock. He didn't know what he would say, what Harry could possibly offer. Olivia opened the door, her face pale and drawn dark circles under her eyes. She looked utterly exhausted. "Harry," she said, her voice raspy. "Is something wrong? I heard about Hope," he said, his own voice sounding unfamiliar. I wanted to see if there was anything at all I could do." Tears welled in Olivia's eyes. "Thank you, Harry. That's kind. But there's not much anyone can do right now except wait and pray." She gestured helplessly. "I've used up all the fever medicine I had." An image of his personal physician, Dr. Alistair Finch, renowned in his field, flashed through Ethan's mind. He could have Finch here with a full medical kit on a chartered helicopter within hours. The words were on the tip of his tongue. "I can get a doctor here. Olivia, a specialist right now. I know people." He saw the desperation in her eyes, the raw fear of a mother for her child, and his carefully constructed persona as Harry threatened to crumble. This was his daughter. His Olivia. He began his voice, urgent, deeper than Harry's usual tone. "There are options. Sometimes in situations like this you need to reach out further. I know it might sound strange, but I might be able to arrange for a doctor from the city to come quickly." Olivia stared at him, her exhaustion momentarily forgotten, replaced by a sudden sharp alertness. Her eyes narrowed, searching his face. The puzzled frown he'd seen before was back deeper now, laced with a dawning, unmistakable suspicion. "Arrange for a doctor from the city," she repeated slowly, her voice dangerously quiet. "Harry, what are you talking about? How could you possibly do something like that?" The small flickering lamp cast long dancing shadows across the cramped room, illuminating Olivia's face, etched with a fear that mirrored Ethan's own. Hope lay on the narrow bed, her breathing shallow, her small face flushed a dangerous crimson. The village remedies had done nothing. The fever was climbing, relentless and terrifying. Each rasping breath his daughter took was a fresh stab of agony for Ethan. The carefully constructed facade of Harry was an unbearable constraint, a suffocating shroud. "Harry, I don't know what else to do," Olivia whispered, her voice cracking. She reached out and clutched his arm, her grip surprisingly strong, desperate. "She's burning up. If only Dr. Peterson wasn't so far, or if the clinic here had more something." He looked at her, at the raw maternal anguish in her eyes, and in that instant, Harry ceased to exist. The pretense, the carefully maintained deception, it all burned away in the crucible of his daughter's peril. This was not a game, not an experiment in humility. This was life and death, his daughter's life. Olivia Ethan said, his voice suddenly firm, imbued with an authority that made her start. He gently disengaged her hand and rose, his movements swift and decisive. "There isn't time to wait for Dr. Peterson. We need to get her to a proper hospital. Now." Olivia stared at him, confusion warring with her fear. A hospital, Harry, the nearest one, is hours away. And how would we even... He was already moving his mind, racing, reverting to the Ethan Ainsworth who commanded resources, who made things happen. He pulled out the cheap, battered burner phone he'd used as Harry, but his fingers fumbled. Useless. He needed his phone, his real phone, which David had insisted he keep hidden in his room for dire emergencies. This qualified. "Stay with her," he commanded, his tone leaving no room for argument. He was out the door and across the small landing, to his own Spartan room in seconds. He retrieved his sleek, powerful smartphone, his fingers flying across the screen, dialing a number he knew by heart. "David," he snapped when the call connected his voice, low but urgent. "Emergency. I need a medevac helicopter, the best pediatric team you can assemble. Destination Oakley Creek. My coordinates will follow. ETA." He listened for a moment. "Make it faster." He ended the call and turned to find Olivia standing in his doorway, her expression one of utter bewildered shock. She had clearly overheard. The sight of the expensive, unfamiliar phone in Harry's hand, the clipped, authoritative tone he'd used. It was all so incongruous, so utterly alien to the persona he had presented. "Harry!" "Who was that?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. What are you doing?" He looked at her, truly looked at her, and the weight of 7 years of his own folly and now weeks of deception crashed down upon him. There was no more hiding. "Olivia," he said, his voice rough with emotion. He took a step towards her, then another, until he was standing directly in front of her. The familiar scent of lavender and worry filled his senses. "The man you know as Harry. It's a lie. All of it." Her eyes widened, a dawning horror filling them. "A lie. What are you saying?" He could see the precise moment the pieces began to click into place in her mind. His strange comments, his unusual capabilities, the expensive phone, the impossible command for a helicopter. Her face already pale with worry, for hope drained of all remaining color. "My real name," he said, the words feeling like stones in his mouth, "is Ethan. Ethan Ainsworth." The name hung in the air between them, heavy and suffocating. Olivia recoiled as if struck. "Ethan Ainsworth," she repeated it, disbelief warring with a terrible dawning recognition. Her hand flew to her mouth, her eyes searching his face, desperately, seeking some sign that this was a cruel joke, a fever-induced hallucination. But she found only the grim, agonizing truth in his gaze. "No," she whispered, shaking her head slowly, then faster. "No, it can't be. You're... The memories, 7 years suppressed, flooded back. The arrogant young air, the dismissive words that had shattered her world, the shame that had driven her away. And now this elaborate, cruel charade. Why, she choked out her voice, trembling with a rising tide of anger and betrayal. Why would you do this after all these years? To come here to pretend to be Harry? Tears streamed down her face, tears of fury, of pain, of a trust so profoundly violated it felt like a physical wound. "Olivia, please." He began reaching for her, but she flinched away from his touch as if burned. "Don't touch me," she cried, her voice raw. "How could you? Did you think it was some kind of game to come here and watch us, to see how the other half lives? Or did your mother Eleanor send you to finally ensure I'd truly disappeared from your precious world?" The mention of his mother, a figure Olivia associated with cold disapproval, dripped with bitterness. No, Olivia, it wasn't like that. Ethan pleaded, his own heart splintering at the agony in her voice. "I came to find you. When I found out about the children." "The children," she spat, her eyes blazing. "You dare speak of them? You who told me I was a pleasant distraction. You who made it clear I was nothing, that we were nothing. She gestured wildly around the small, impoverished room. Look at this, Ethan. This is my life, the life I've scraped together for our daughters, while you lived in your palaces, without a care, without a thought for us. That's not true, He tried to explain, to articulate the emptiness he'd felt, the regret that had driven him. But his words were drowned out by the storm of her pain. 7 years, Ethan. She sobbed, her body shaking. 7 years I've raised them alone. 4 of them, do you have any idea what that's like? The worry, the fear, the constant struggle. Every time one of them was sick, every time I couldn't afford something they needed, did you ever once wonder? Did you ever once care? The accusation, so raw and so true, flayed him. He had no defense. His wealth, his power, they were meaningless in the face of her righteous fury. He saw himself then, not as the powerful Ethan Ainsworth, but as a coward, a fool who had thrown away something precious, and then compounded his sin with another layer of deceit. I am so sorry, Olivia. He whispered the words, inadequate, a pathetic offering. More sorry than I can ever say. For then and for now. The distant thrum of helicopter blades began to intrude upon the suffocating silence, a sound alien to the quiet Oakley Creek night. Hope on the bed stirred fretfully, a small moan escaping her lips. Olivia's attention snapped back to her daughter, her maternal instinct momentarily overriding her rage. But when she looked back at Ethan, her eyes were like ice. "Get the doctor," she said, her voice flat, devoid of all emotion, save for a chilling finality. "For Hope. And then, Ethan Ainsworth, you will leave this village. You will leave us alone. You are not welcome here. My children do not need a father who is a ghost from the past and a liar in the present." She turned her back on him, moving to Hope's bedside, her shoulders rigid. The helicopter's approach was louder now, a roaring harbinger of rescue for one, and perhaps utter desolation for another. Ethan stood frozen, the full weight of his actions, past and present, crashing down upon him with devastating force. He had found them only to lose them all over again, perhaps this time irrevocably. The medevac team was ruthlessly efficient. Within minutes of landing in a hastily cleared field near the edge of Oakley Creek, a spectacle that drew sleepy, bewildered villagers from their beds, Hope was stabilized and secured for transport, Olivia white-faced and numb by her side. Ethan had overseen the transfer with a quiet, steely competence that was pure Ainsworth, then stepped back as the helicopter lifted off its blades, beating a rhythm of departure that echoed the finality of Olivia's words. He didn't leave. He couldn't. David, who had materialized as silently as the pre-dawn mist, found Ethan hours later, still standing in that field, the dew soaking his worn boots, his gaze fixed on the empty sky. "She's at St. Michael's best pediatric unit in the state," David reported, his voice neutral. "Dr. Armitage is attending. I've arranged for a suite for Miss Walker. Hope's stable prognosis is good. High fever, severe dehydration, but they're managing it." Ethan nodded, a slow, heavy movement. And Olivia refused any assistance beyond what was necessary for Hope. She made her feelings about your involvement quite clear to the hospital liaison. Of course she had. The shame was a physical weight, pressing down on Ethan, crushing the air from his lungs. "Find me a place to stay, David. Something inconspicuous on the outskirts of the village, and keep me updated, hourly, on Hope and on Olivia." Sir David began, a rare note of caution in his voice, perhaps some distance. No, Ethan cut him off, his voice raw. "I'm not leaving. Not yet. I caused this. All of it. The least I can do is bear witness to the consequences. The days that followed were a blur of agonizing inactivity and profound self-recrimination. He stayed in a dilapidated hunter's cabin David found a few miles from Oakley Creek, a place as stark and empty as he felt inside. The silence was deafening, broken only by David's periodic terse updates. Hope was improving. Olivia was exhausted, but resilient, never leaving her daughter's side. She continued to refuse any direct help from him. Ethan walked for miles through the unfamiliar woods, the physical exertion, a small outlet for the turmoil within. He replayed every moment with Olivia, both from 7 years ago and from the recent weeks as Harry. Each careless word, each missed opportunity, each layer of deceit was a fresh indictment. He had sought to understand her life, to see his children, but his methods had been rooted in the same arrogance and control that had driven her away in the first place. He hadn't trusted her with the truth, not then, and not now. He'd wanted to manage the situation to orchestrate a reunion on his terms, and in doing so he had inflicted even greater pain. He remembered the warmth in her small cottage, the scent of baking bread Chloe often brought over the chaotic, joyful symphony of 4 little girls' laughter. He remembered the weariness in Olivia's eyes, but also the fierce, unwavering love that had seen her through 7 years of solitary struggle. He had glimpsed a life of genuine connection, a life he had forfeited through his own youthful pride and fear, and then trampled upon with his recent deception. In Oakley Creek, Olivia returned with a recovering, but still weak hope a week later. The other 3 girls who had been staying with a bewildered but supportive Chloe enveloped their mother and sister in a flurry of hugs and tearful relief. But their joy was soon tempered by confusion. "Mommy, where did Mr. Harry go?" Joy asked one evening, her lower lip trembling. "Is he mad at us because Hope got sick, Grace?" Ever perceptive, added quietly, "He looked so sad when the noisy bird came for Hope." Olivia's heart ached. How could she explain she had told Chloe a heavily edited version of events, the shock still too raw to articulate the full extent of Ethan's deception or his true identity? To her friend, Harry was a kind stranger who had, in a moment of crisis, revealed access to unexpected resources, and then, overwhelmed, or perhaps embarrassed, had simply vanished. "Mr. Harry had to go away, sweeties," Olivia said, her voice gentle, trying to mask her own turmoil. He was just passing through. But the explanation felt hollow, even to her own ears. She found herself missing the quiet companionship of Harry, his steady presence, the way he'd looked at her children with such undisguised tenderness. And then the image would morph, replaced by the face of Ethan Ainsworth, the billionaire, the liar, and a fresh wave of anger and betrayal would wash over her. Yet beneath it all a treacherous current of an old, almost forgotten feeling stirred. The memory of a younger Ethan before the world and his family had fully molded him, a young man she had, however, briefly allowed herself to care for. Ethan, meanwhile, channeled his restless energy. He learned from David about the village's struggles, the leaky roof of the small community hall that served as a schoolhouse, the outdated equipment at the tiny volunteer fire department, the very real concern Olivia had expressed to Harry about the upcoming winter, and the cost of heating fuel for her poorly insulated cottage. He couldn't approach her, not yet. But he could act. Through a series of carefully anonymous donations, facilitated by David, through a newly created charitable front, things began to change in Oakley Creek. A load of high-quality roofing materials arrived for the community hall. New hoses and safety gear appeared at the fire station. A local program offering subsidized heating oil for low-income families suddenly found itself with a substantial, unexpected benefactor, significantly reducing the winter burden for many, including Olivia. Olivia noticed. The entire village noticed. There were whispers of a secret angel, a mysterious benefactor. Chloe was full of theories. First Harry and his miracle helicopter doctor, Now this Chloe exclaimed one afternoon at Olivia's stall. It's like Oakley Creek suddenly hit some kind of philanthropic jackpot. Maybe that Harry fellow won the lottery after he left and decided to share the love. Olivia said nothing but a strange disquiet settled in her heart. The timing was too coincidental, the specific needs being addressed. They were things she had worried about, things Harry had listened to with such quiet intensity. Could it be? Could this secret angel be the same man who had shattered her trust so completely? The thought was both ridiculous and deeply unsettling. What was he trying to do? Was this another form of control, a billionaire's way of solving his conscience from afar? Or was it something else? One crisp autumn afternoon, a delivery truck, an unfamiliar sight in Oakley Creek, rumbled to a stop before Olivia's cottage. 2 workmen emerged and with quiet efficiency began unloading new insulated windows and rolls of thick attic insulation. Olivia watched stunned as they approached her. Ms. Walker, one of them asked. "We're here about the winterization upgrade. All expenses covered by the Community Assist program." Olivia stood frozen, her gaze fixed on the materials. The Community Assist program. That was the anonymous donor. This wasn't just general village aid. This was specific. This was personal. Her breath hitched. He knew about her worries for the cottage, for her girl's warmth in the coming winter. The gesture was too targeted, too intimately aware of her unspoken fears. A complex wave of emotions washed over her. Confusion, a resurgence of anger at his audacity, but also a tiny, reluctant flicker of something she couldn't quite name. It felt dangerously like gratitude. "What is he trying to do?" she whispered to the empty air, her gaze sweeping towards the distant woods, where she sometimes felt an unseen presence. What does Ethan Ainsworth really want? The winterization of Olivia's cottage, a gesture so specific and undeniably from Ethan, left her in a state of profound disquiet. It was one thing to imagine an anonymous benefactor showering Oakley Creek with general goodwill. It was another entirely to be the direct personal recipient of such a targeted, expensive act of charity. Or was it penance from a man who had shattered her world twice? She found herself watching the 4 girls more closely as they chattered about Mr. Harry. Their innocent anecdotes, their remembered kindnesses, painted a picture of a man starkly different from the arrogant young heir who had dismissed her, and equally different from the powerful billionaire who had recently confessed his elaborate deception. Could a man truly change so much? Or was this just another, more insidious form of manipulation? The children were the first crack in her resolve. Their sadness over Mr. Harry's disappearance was a constant low thrum in the cottage. "Do you think Mr. Harry will ever come back?" Mummy Faith asked one evening, her voice small as Olivia tucked her into bed. "He promised to show me how to whittle a bird." Olivia's heart twisted. Looking into her daughter's hopeful eyes, she saw a reflection of her own conflicted yearning. A few days later, a cautiously worded message reached her via Chloe, who had been an unwilling intermediary for a note from David. Ethan, it seemed, was still nearby. He wasn't asking to see her, not directly. He was asking humbly if he might be allowed to see Hope, Grace, Faith, and Joy, even from a distance perhaps, at the village park, under Olivia's supervision. He promised not to cause any distress. After a restless night, torn between her anger and the undeniable longing in her children's eyes, and if she was honest, a flicker of something unnameable in her own heart, Olivia sent a curt reply. Saturday, 2:00, the park, 1 hour. Ethan arrived looking like a man walking on eggshells, his expensive casual wear somehow still looking out of place, Yet his demeanor was stripped of all pretense. He was just Ethan. Nervous, hopeful, and deeply uncertain. The girls, upon seeing him, shrieked with a mixture of surprise and delight. Mr. Harry Yu came back before Olivia gently corrected them. "This is Mr. Ainsworth. Children. Ethan." The initial moments were awkward. The girls, though momentarily confused by the name change, quickly reverted to their easy affection for the man they knew as kind, Harry. Hope, fully recovered, shyly presented him with a drawing of a helicopter. Ethan accepted it with a reverence that touched Olivia despite herself. He was clumsy in his attempts to play their simple games, a billionaire, fumbling with a skipping rope, his attempts to push Grace on the rusty swing, either too tentative or too forceful, resulting in peals of laughter from the girls and a flush on Ethan's own face. Olivia watched from a park bench, her arms crossed a sentinel of caution. Yet as she observed his genuine efforts, his undisguised joy in their presence, the ice around her heart began to thaw almost imperceptibly. He wasn't Harry the kind peddler, nor was he entirely the cold young man from her past. This Ethan was different, vulnerable. These carefully chaperoned visits became a tentative routine. Ethan never overstayed, never presumed. He listened more than he spoke, his attention wholly on the children. Yet Olivia felt his gaze on her, too respectful questioning, laden with an unspoken apology. The fragile peace was shattered by the unannounced arrival of a sleek black car that purred into Oakley Creek one crisp afternoon, a metallic predator in the quiet, rustic landscape. From it emerged Mrs. Eleanor Ainsworth, her posture ramrod straight, her expression one of cool, appraising distaste as she surveyed the village. Ethan had been in the middle of being taught by Joy and Faith how to make a daisy chain, his large hands comically inept with the delicate stems when he saw his mother. A cold dread washed over him. He had intended to tell her on his own terms in his own time. This was a disaster. "Ethan, darling," Mrs. Ainsworth called her voice, carrying clearly across the small green a silken command. "I believe it's time we had a little chat, don't you?" Her eyes, sharp and discerning, flickered towards Olivia, who had frozen by her market stall then, to the four girls who now clung to Ethan's legs, sensing the sudden tension. The chat took place in the cramped, lace-curtained parlour of the village's only boarding house. Mrs. Ainsworth did not mince words. "Ethan, I understand youthful indiscretions," she began, her voice like chipped ice. "But this prolonged sentimentality is unbecoming. 4 children, Ethan. In a place like this, with her dismissive glance towards the window in the general direction of Olivia's cottage was laden with disdain. "You have a legacy to consider, a position in society. This rustic fantasy must end." Ethan felt a familiar wave of youthful inadequacy threaten to engulf him, the old instinct to placate, to defer to his mother's formidable will. But then he saw in his mind's eye Olivia's tired, resilient face, the bright, trusting eyes of hope, grace, faith, and joy. And something snapped. The man he was becoming, the father he wanted to be, finally found its voice. "Mother," he said, his voice, quiet but firm, resonating with a strength she had never heard from him before. "This is not a rustic fantasy. This is my family. Olivia is the mother of my children, and a woman of incredible strength and integrity, more than many you deem suitable. And those 4 girls, they are my daughters, my responsibility, my joy." Mrs. Ainsworth's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose. "Joy, Ethan, be sensible. This will be a scandal. It will affect the company you're standing." "My standing," Ethan interrupted, a mirthless smile touching his lips. "My standing has been a hollow facade for years. These past few months, Even amidst the lies I told, I felt more real, more alive than I have in decades. My only regret is the pain I've caused Olivia both then and now. But I will not abandon my children or their mother to satisfy your sense of propriety or to protect a legacy that has brought me nothing but emptiness. He stood up, towering over her. You will treat Olivia and my daughters with respect, Mother, or you will not be a part of their lives, or consequently mine in any meaningful way. The choice is yours. Unbeknownst to either of them, Olivia, drawn by the sight of the imposing black car and a sense of foreboding, had approached the boarding house. Chloe was with her, a supportive presence. They hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but the parlor window was slightly ajar, and Ethan's uncharacteristically forceful words, his passionate defense of her and their children against the bing-leng-bang-leng, icy cold disapproval of the formidable Mrs. Ainsworth, carried clearly to where she stood hidden. Olivia's hand flew to her mouth, tears springing to her eyes. Not tears of anger or pain this time, but of a stunned, overwhelming realization. The boy she had known, lost in the shadow of his mother, and his wealth was gone. In his place stood a man, flawed and regretful, yes, but also a man of newfound strength, willing to defy the world, even his own powerful mother, for her and for their children. The ice around Olivia's heart didn't just thaw, it shattered, and for the first time in 7 long years, a fragile, tentative shoot of hope, a genuine hope for a future she had never dared to imagine, began to unfurl. Ethan's passionate defense of Olivia and their daughters, overheard from the slightly ajar window, resonated through Olivia like a seismic shock, dismantling the last vestiges of her hardened resolve. This was not the callow youth who had wounded her, nor the deceptive Harry who had confused her. This was a man staking his entire world on their behalf, a man reborn from the ashes of his past mistakes. Chloe squeezed her hand, her eyes wide, with a mixture of awe and approval. When Ethan emerged from the boarding house, his face pale but resolute, he found Olivia waiting for him on the green, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows. Mrs. Eleanor Ainsworth swept past them both with a stiff nod, got into her black car, and was driven away, leaving a charged silence in her wake. Olivia, Ethan began, his voice hoarse. She stepped forward, closing the small distance between them, and gently placed her fingers on his lips. I heard, Ethan, she said softly, tears glistening in her eyes. But these were not the tears of anger or betrayal he had witnessed before. These were tears of a complex, dawning relief. I heard what you said to your mother. He searched her face, his heart pounding, and a slow, tremulous smile touched her lips. And I think for the first time in a long, long while, I'm starting to believe that Harry wasn't entirely a fiction. The kindness, the patience, perhaps that was the real you struggling to get out. His own eyes burned. It was Olivia. It is. The man I want to be, for you and for hope, grace, faith, and joy. They talked for hours that evening, after the girls were asleep, sitting on the worn porch swing of her little cottage. The past was unspooled, not with rancor, but with a quiet honesty. He spoke of his lonely upbringing, the immense pressure of his family name, his youthful fear of emotional entanglement, and the profound gnawing regret that had been his constant companion for 7 years. She in turn spoke of her struggles, her fears as a young single mother, but also of the immeasurable joy her 4 daughters had brought her, the strength she had found within herself. There were no easy absolutions, but understanding, like a gentle dawn, began to illuminate the shadowed corners of their shared history. A week later, Mrs. Eleanor Ainsworth returned. This time her arrival was unannounced by a sleek car, but by a simple chauffeured sedan. She did not request a formal meeting, but instead asked if she might see her granddaughters. Olivia, after a long, searching look at Ethan, who nodded his quiet support, agreed. The initial encounter was cautious. Eleanor Ainsworth, a woman accustomed to boardrooms and society galas, looked somewhat out of her depth, faced with 4 identical, curious and entirely uninhibited 6-year-olds. Grandmother Hope asked, tilting her head an exact echo of Ethan's thoughtful expression. Joy, never shy, piped up. Your hair is very tall, grandmother. Does it reach the sky? Eleanor, for a moment, looked utterly nonplussed. Then a strange, soft expression flickered across her usually imperious features. Ethan saw her visibly wrestle with a lifetime of conditioning. Slowly, hesitantly, she knelt, a significant concession for a woman who rarely unbent, and looked into Joy's bright, upturned face. No, dear child, she said, her voice surprisingly gentle. It does not quite reach the sky. A tiny, almost shy smile touched her lips. It was a start. A fragile but definite start. Life in Oakley Creek began to find a new tentative rhythm. Ethan no longer Harry-divided his time. He still maintained his city responsibilities, flying in and out, via a discreetly chartered plane to a nearby private airfield. But his heart, he realized now, resided in this small, unassuming village. He learned to mend leaking faucets badly at first, much to the girls' amusement, to plant a small vegetable garden. With Olivia, his rows were always crooked, and to tell bedtime stories that often involved bumbling billionaires and clever village girls. One sun-drenched afternoon, as they watched the fourfold chase butterflies in the meadow behind Olivia's cottage, Ethan turned to her. His heart was in his throat. He hadn't planned this, not with a grand gesture, but the moment felt right. Olivia, he said, taking her hand, her fingers calloused from work, but gentle curled around his. I know I have no right to ask for anything after everything, but these past months, being with you, with our daughters, it's been the only time in my life I've felt truly whole. He fumbled in his pocket, not for a diamond ring sourced from a vault, that would come later if she wished, but for a small, smooth river stone he'd picked up on one of his walks, a symbol of the simple, enduring beauty he'd found here. I love you, Olivia Walker. I loved you then, even if I was too foolish and afraid to admit it, and I love you more fiercely now than I can say. I want to spend the rest of my life making up for the lost years being a father to our incredible girls, and a true partner to you. He paused, then added, his voice thick with emotion. The girls, they were wondering if I might officially become their Daddy Ethan, instead of just Mr. Ainsworth who plays with us. Joy, Grace, Faith, and Hope, as if on cue, abandoned their butterfly chase and came tumbling towards them, their faces bright with mischief. Mommy Faith called out, We think Daddy Ethan should ask you something important with a shiny thing, Hope giggled. Joy said he should practice on the stone first. Ethan looked at Olivia, a sheepish, loving smile on his face. Olivia's laughter, clear and musical, bubbled up a sound he had longed to hear without reservation. Tears streamed down her face, but this time they were tears of pure, unadulterated happiness. Yes, Ethan Ainsworth, she said, her voice trembling but clear. Yes, 1,000 times yes. Their wedding was not a society affair splashed across tabloids. It was held in the autumn, in the small, flower-filled garden of Olivia's cottage in Oakley Creek, the place where their new life had truly begun. Mrs. Eleanor Ainsworth was there looking surprisingly serene as she held hands with 2 of her granddaughters. Chloe was Olivia's beaming maid of honor. David, in a rare display of non-professionalism, actually smiled. Hope, Grace, Faith, and Joy, dressed in simple white dresses with wildflower crowns, were the most enthusiastic of bridesmaids, nearly tripping over themselves in their excitement to scatter petals. As Ethan slipped a simple gold band onto Olivia's finger, he knew this was not just a new beginning, but the culmination of a long, painful, yet ultimately redemptive journey. The scars of the past would always remain a reminder of mistakes made and lessons learned, but they no longer defined him or them. Later, as the sun set, painting the sky in hues of rose and gold, Ethan watched Olivia laughing with their daughters, her face radiant. He pulled her close, breathing in the familiar scent of lavender and home. The emptiness that had once consumed him was gone, replaced by a profound, unshakable peace. An earned peace built on the foundations of humility, forgiveness, and a love that had against all odds been given a second chance to bloom. He was no longer just Ethan Ainsworth, the billionaire. He was a husband, a father, a man who had finally truly found his way home. And so Ethan and Olivia, with their precious daughters, Hope, Grace, Faith, and Joy, finally found their way, not just back to each other, but to a new beginning woven from threads of regret, resilience, and ultimately profound love. Their journey reminds us that sometimes the paths to our deepest connections are paved with our greatest mistakes, and the courage to face them can lead to the most unexpected, beautiful destinations. Isn't it true that the most profound peace is often the peace we've had to fight hardest, to earn mending the broken pieces of the past, to build a stronger future? Perhaps their story whispers a gentle truth that the capacity for change and the healing power of forgiveness reside within us all, waiting for a chance to blossom. This story of a love lost and tenderly reclaimed, of a family pieced back together with courage and open hearts, has certainly left a deep imprint on us. We wonder what resonated most with you. We'd genuinely love to hear your reflections. What do you believe was the truest test of Ethan's redemption? Was it his quiet acts of kindness while disguised as Harry, or his courage in finally standing up to his mother for Olivia and their daughters? Your insights enrich our understanding. Furthermore, we pour our hearts into bringing these narratives to life, and your perspective is invaluable. If there's any aspect of Ethan and Olivia's journey that particularly moved you, or if you have any thoughts on how we could make our future stories even more compelling or our storytelling more impactful, please do share your constructive ideas in the comments below. Your feedback is a cherished gift that helps us grow and refine our craft every day. If Ethan and Olivia's path to forgiveness and family touched your heart, a like would mean so much to us. And if you feel this story might offer a little hope or resonate with someone you know, we invite you to share it with them. To continue exploring more tales of complex lives and the enduring strength of the human spirit, do subscribe and ring that notification bell. We'd be honored to have you join our community of fellow story enthusiasts, where every voice and every shared thought helps us all connect more deeply. Before you go, perhaps you'd like to discover another journey of love and resilience waiting for you in the videos suggested on your screen. Until next time, may your own life's narrative be filled with moments of courage, understanding, and the enduring warmth of connection. Take good care.